I swear I didn't mean to start work on this during the month of sexy nurses and diabetes, but my friend recommended this game after telling me it was made by my current favorite indie developer Akuma Kira. I know Kira worked with AMG Sheena on this game as well, but I haven't played any other things she's worked on. I've been a fan since I played Lost in Vivo last year, with Kira releasing Lunacid in early access and the contribution to DreadX in the form of Uktena 64. Now I'll be honest, the title and the year it released in didn't exactly fill me with confidence, having the word Jumpscare in the title, and releasing in the year of our Lord PewDiePie 2014. Assuming it was going to be a literal jumpscare fest and having quirky and dated humour. I was half right. Some of the notes you can find in the game probably had the 9gag logo scrubbed from the pages, but to its credit, and then detriment, the game is well reserved with scares until the latter half. A bit too well. I feel like the 1,000 rooms is a gimmick for either sounding like it has a lot of content or the zaniness of 2014 bled into the game design. All jokes aside, this game has some real good moments. They are just a bit too few and far between. This game on average is about 2 hours long, but felt way longer. I promise this isn't some ADHD normie gamer thing where if I'm not getting actively scared every 5 seconds, it's not a good horror game. I can absolutely get behind some of the ideas here, and from what I can tell, this was Kira's first game. They did a really good job straight out of the gate. For context, I am also playing the HD renovation, which has had a few changes from the base game, making health regen faster and adjusting the way sprinting works, which, considering what they were changed from, makes the original sound a bit more painful to play. Prickly intro aside, the real bitch of this game is working out how to critique it thoroughly and fairly without sounding like I'm not just being lazy or cherry picking my arguments. I feel that a better way of condensing the game would have less rooms, but bigger ones, so that each room itself feels a lot more unique. I understand having plain rooms is to lower your guard and so you never know what's coming, but my problem is that it does it too often. By room 100, it's very obvious shit is going down. I was ready for it to start picking up and I was genuinely on edge, but no, after a minor scare 100 rooms in, it's then back to holding Shift W for another 300 rooms with more minor scares and a few enemies chasing you down. The enemies are a mixed bag, with most of them mechanically being the same, a few interesting and one downright annoying. Every single enemy, called specimens, all chase the player, except for the final boss, which has very simple combat mechanics. I understand that this was a limitation of the old engine it was in, so giving us the ability to juggle enemies and use Devil Trigger would have destroyed the horror aspect. Instead of using their in-game names of specimens 1 to 13, I'm going to give each one a nickname just to entertain myself and so I don't have to say specimen 1,000 times. Yes, I saw some have cute names on the wiki, but they aren't explicitly stated in game and all sound like Tumblr fanfic, so I'm not saying them, he says as he's about to write his own unoriginal names. If you have seen any marketing for the game, you've seen this one. Taking the form of a different type of cardboard cutouts that have cute art on them, such as a ghost, a pumpkin, a tree stump, or an ice cream cone, etc., except for 2 images that are something else. The most consistently appearing enemy spanning across all 1,000 rooms. They pose no actual threat except for when they combine with other pursuers, they can jump out in front of you, stopping your movement entirely. Sometimes they have a note on them, and once you get the axe, you can chop them in half for no real benefit, although this can affect the ending, which I'll get to later. Your first actual threat in the game upon reaching room 60. This brave soul who took the form of the inside of my sock after a good weekend. Your first of many pursuers, being one of the more interactive ones. In each room that it chases you through spawns random puddles of see previous joke that slow you down when trying to walk through. These can spawn in choke points, making it somewhat of a bother trying to get away from it. Basically a huge ass centipede that moves way quicker than I would like, especially because I have really bad creepy crawlyitis. A warning sign you're about to be chased by one is seeing big holes in the ceiling, which is how it starts and continues its chase. Unless you enter a room which doesn't have one, then it just busts down the door behind you. She works the same as Guiji but doesn't spawn puddles, moves faster and can phase through walls. When she's close to you, she opens her mouth super wide and it's actually fucked. If you took Pyramid Head, the Bubblehead Nurse, and put them together with paper mache, you get this, which is a compliment. It's one of the cooler enemies, having a stop motion type of movement with a sick after image effect behind it. Its abilities are warping the texture of the room you're in, which combined with the maze-like void rooms can be extremely disorientating, plus having a thick fog laid everywhere makes it a genuinely creepy pursuer. If you know what a weeping angel is, then you know how this guy works. For those of you who have seen another person take their pants off with consent, he basically moves when you aren't looking, standing still when observed. However, if you look at him for too long, he'll move anyway out of pure spite, so evading him is a careful balancing act. What makes him creepy is that he looks like a regular low poly dude, and as someone who loves PS1 style horror, he stands on his own being creepy. The only enemy in the game to be used for the appropriate amount of time. It chases you once in the entire game for the span of a few rooms. It moves very slowly but kills you on contact, as opposed to other enemies who do varying amounts of damage. Looking like a cross between a furry and a school shooter, this demonic entity can phase through walls like the Grudge, obscuring your vision like paper mache head, but instead of a fog, it's a static flickering overlay, and taking damage from it gives you a jump scare. Operating on two different extremes, this humanoid-looking skull functions as both a random insta-kill obstacle and the final boss of the game in a different form. For the insta-kill, anytime after room 51, you can enter a room with 3 paths: a door to your left, one to your right, and a long dark path ahead. The correct choice is the door on the left, as the door on the right is a dud and going down the hallway leads the walls to get more and more narrow, at which point John rushes you and kills you. As the final boss, however, it might as well be a new enemy. Having only 3 moves, one where he raises pillars from the ground, another where a shadow hand tracks you for a bit, stopping in place for a bunch of hands to follow the shadow's trail, and the final attack being the only way to damage him is to play tennis with the energy blasts coming at you, then going full lumberjack on his ass. Can go through walls like the Grudge, but basically gaslights you by making doors flicker in and out of visibility. Only works if you don't have the room layouts memorized, which by the point you encounter him, you probably should have. Half pursuer, half room. Upon entering room 810, you will be greeted with a Victorian mansion. No, not the one you entered 809 rooms ago. This is its own thing, its own specimen. This is arguably one of the most unique parts of the game, where in case you didn't get the reference from the name I used, is a Resident Evil homage, where you can explore rooms and get keys to other rooms. The tower part comes from, in certain rooms, a man with a gardening tool being used incorrectly will hunt you and you have to hide from him. Hiding is pretty simple, just look for some boxes that have an interaction prompt and wait for the sound of a door opening. It doesn't matter if he looks at you entering the boxes, he'll just go back to snooping. Once finishing the exploration part of the mansion, he then turns into a regular chase. When in water, she charges you and you have to balance progressing through the water while jumping on boxes to avoid her. It worked in Amnesia and it works here. Again, the big difference that may as well be the main theme of the video is it's used too much. She appears in room 910 first, with the wiki stating she usually stops chasing around 930. However, in my playthrough, I was chasing till room 944, which was exhausting. Another reason I'm not a fan of the procedurally generated rooms. After writing the explanations for all the specimens, I started to get the feeling that I'm padding out the video because, to be honest, the base game doesn't really have a lot to talk about. The enemies are the most consistent part throughout, and the game has a few good scares. The soundtrack is nice, but I don't like talking about soundtracks in games because they are one of the few things you can't really be objective about in game design. I'm conflicted on the cat DOS because it does a decent job building tension for the threats you will have to face. However, it also explains the mechanics straight out. One even explains how to get the good ending, but you won't know it until a wiki binge. One small change that would make the cat DOS perfect is if it didn't tell you what each specimen does until you've actually encountered that specimen. Telling you how an enemy works removes the panic of working them out in the moment. I guess it's also a moot point because all of them are avoided by holding Shift W, but I digress. One thing I do like is how cheeky the endings are. In both the base game and the DLCs, the ending is arguably the best part. Whether that means I don't have to play it anymore or because the stories are interesting, I'll leave up to you. Over halfway through the game, you find an axe stuck in a tree and the prompt to take it. Sadly for me, it didn't give me a sense of power because even though you can hit a few of the monsters for differing results, such as knocking down the puppet, and he can't chase you for that single room, it would mean I go through the room slower. Turns out that's not really what it's for though, at least until the final boss. The axe is actually used rarely to clear obstacles in your way, a few wooden planks on doors, some vines at a vent, and the chains on the door to the final room. However, there are a few rooms that have some violent deer, including the one that you get the axe in. You know, give us a weapon, give us enemies, and there you go, it's game design 101. This is a trap. It's vague and only slightly hinted at with the school shooter's lore dump on the cat DOS, but a trap nonetheless. The game has a secret violence counter. If you chop too many cardboard cutouts, deer, or even specimens, you'll get the bad ending. Being more conservative with your axe will grant you the good ending and even an achievement. I'm not going to explain each ending here because I don't really care to. Now, I apologize for seeming like I made this video to be spiteful to an 8-year-old indie game, but unfortunately the base game really is kind of bland and exhausting on a mechanical level. Atmosphere is important in horror games, and this game does it well enough. but it's not enough for what the base game is. I was ready to write this game off as it was good for the time and it's just aged poorly, which it has. But then I launched the DLC. I didn't know a thing about either of the DLCs going into them, except that they were more open. This is shown right from the get-go when the elevator you're on speeds up to the point the room counter crashes and disappears. After a few cursory hallways, Spooky appears telling you she doesn't remember the rooms you're about to go through and wishes you luck. One more hallway and the DLC starts proper. You enter a hospital lobby. First thing you'll notice is there is a permanent fog effect around the area, like when Specimen 5 is chasing you, further adding to the not a Silent Hill reference, and a blue sign saying drinking fountain that upon interacting saves your game and flashes the screen red. Not a Silent Hill reference, by the way. It starts with your usual survival horror-esque exploring, finding notes, getting the lay of the land, and finding out which doors are locked by a key and which ones are locked by the developers. My only criticism here is that there is a lot of dead rooms. By that, I mean rooms that offer no notes or items towards progression. These are rooms that in a regular survival horror game would have optional items in them like health and ammo, but because this game doesn't really have an inventory or need for such items, the only thing these rooms can offer is adding to the illusion that the hospital is a real place, which in itself isn't a negative even if I'm making out to seem like one. My main point is that there are too many rooms, just a few less and it would have been fine, except for the one room that you turn off the power, unlocking a few more doors and permanently tinting the fog a blood red. Spooky. Going through one of the new doors, you will come across the first enemy of the DLC, a security guard standing immobile blocking the next door. What you need to do is leave the hallway he's in. Not any of the rooms in that hallway, the actual hallway itself to an area you've already been before. Yes, this does show the players how the hospital is basically a square in terms of map layout, which can help get the players' bearings, but there is nothing that tells the player to go back and check on the enemy, because once they do, he then starts moving around. He doesn't do anything except slowly walk after you, and only in this hallway, but now you can go past the door he was guarding. Downstairs, you get two key items, one being a jug of acid and the other being a medallion for a slot you saw earlier on. Leaving this room introduces you to the second enemy, a man in a body bag who screams and chases you. Again, nothing you haven't seen before. You run into Spooky again, who gives you a half-hearted encouragement that you can make it. Using the medallion in the office opens a secret panel to a dark staircase. You've been going down basement stairs for most of the DLC now, but this set me on absolute edge. Not a damn thing actually happens to you in the staircase, but my dumb ass didn't know that. The ambience and body parts on the stairs absolutely sell it, and the area I was about to go into. While the game has been reserved with its enemies, having them only being one-offs, this is where the game ramps up the enemy encounters to the speed of which I've been explaining this DLC. There are not one, not two, but 3 different enemies you can interact with down here. The first one you may not even see if you don't stop to take in your surroundings because it moves so slowly and spawns out of bound. It looks cool though, more Silent Hill design creeping in, which is always a good thing in my book. The second enemy appears soon after when you pick up the key item, being foreshadowed in the room you pick it up in. Greeting you outside the room, he screams and chases you. He works like the puppet except way more aggressive, moving really fast when you aren't looking and only slowing down a bit when you are. He's meant to chase you back to the stairs, but I got lost and ended up in the hallway where a worse fate would have met me had I not screwed up the chase. In this lower area you've been running around in is a hallway. That seems like it goes on forever. Similar to the head of John Romero's first incarnation, if you go too far down this hallway you'll get jump scared and insta-killed by this. Going back upstairs, we find the isolation zone, a few doors, and a note, which I'm not going to explain the backstory, because if you do play this DLC, which I do recommend, at least you'll have something to look forward to. The next door leads us to the final enemy encounter, a cow in a maze. The section is thankfully extremely short, and the maze is actually difficult to navigate thanks to the fog and repeating grate textures, but aside from that there isn't really much to say, so I won't. You end up in the otherworld completing the Silent Hill reference checklist. Finally, you come across the exit. Spooky seems surprised at what was down there, says, "We'll see what happens next," and the DLC ends. The DLC has 2 changes if you replay it in New Game Plus. One, something named Carl will scream at you from the toilets, and the painting in the medallion room has been changed to a sword that you can swap your axe for. This sword lets you kill all the enemies except for the hallway lady. It's a nice revenge tour for those that have struggled in the DLC. This also changes dialogue for an NPC that I didn't find in either playthrough, but more likely I didn't just notice them. I also found out that there's a chair that if you sit in, you'll have hallucinations and then be kicked out, but I didn't experience it in my playthrough and I only found it out upon double checking that I didn't miss anything in the wiki. Straight out of the gate, you are shown two new changes to gameplay, one being an admittedly minor twist in the grand scheme of things. You were told that due to asbestos, your native health regeneration is gone, and two, there is a big hand floating in front of you. The hand is showing you that you can interact with the door that's behind you. This confused me at first until I realized that the hitbox for interacting with the door is so huge you can use the door facing away from it. Anyway, this is how interactables will be handled throughout the DLC. Things you can take or use will have the hand icon, and things you look at will have a big eyeball. It actually took some getting used to after the hospital DLC, where you have the same sort of survival horror-esque exploration, but no help aside from items winking at you. You start with the axe and have access to a save point, now being a jewelry or a music box, I don't know. And just like the hospital, you start seeing notes everywhere. Except these ones actually explain the main gimmick of the DLC. The doll, aka the companion cube, is both a key item and your only source of healing. Upon taking damage, you squeeze the doll and it heals you, I guess? But this lowers its mood, which can only be replenished by having a tea party with it. No, I'm not kidding. If the doll's mood stays low for too long, you'll be attacked by a nanny-looking ghost that dies in one hit. That on its own would be a useless consequence, but it also takes away the ability to heal at all, so you have a reason to keep the doll charged. Not that it ever got low on my first or second playthrough, aside from the one scripted time that it does happen. You also get a map, which is a first for this game. It's quite well done too. You just look down, press the interact key, and there it is. It tells you the room you're in and the names of rooms you should probably investigate. Aside from these things I've talked about, the DLC plays exactly like the hospital, a mini Silent Hill map with simple progression puzzles. At the risk of sounding lazy, I'm not going to talk about all the enemies because it's nothing you haven't seen before, and I feel like I've padded out this video enough. Nor am I going to go too in depth into the progression of this DLC because I actually would like you to play this one because this is my favorite DLC and I actually don't want to spoil anything. The DLC also has two endings again, but the way to accomplish each one is very different, one being the default bad ending just by finishing the DLC normally. But the good one is obtained with some backtracking for items that you couldn't pick up for no good reason. A cool moment, I guess, is when you play as spoilers with a rifle and start shooting ghouls. It's genuinely spooky even though you have a weapon. In conclusion, I'm kind of conflicted on Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion, because the base game isn't really worth your time, although you should probably play it before the DLC so you can see what makes them special, because I don't think playing the DLCs on their own would do the entire package justice. My advice is to just rush the main game, it only takes about 2 hours at most, then play each DLC twice for both endings. I didn't talk about Endless Mode because it's just the base game except with zero deliberacy, which was the only good part of the base game. You can make the argument that it makes the chases more interesting because you can be chased by more than one enemy at a time, but again, with pretty much all the enemies being pursuers and your only gameplay mechanic being running, it's still boring. I got up to room 500 and it was funny having two Gooijis chase me with double the goop, but it's still just a novelty, honestly. If you do play this game, however, I recommend shelling out 15 AUD for the HD version. It plays better, fixing the gorilla grip the corners of rooms had in the OG version. It also has a proper options menu, even though every time I booted up the game, I had to change my sensitivity because it doesn't save it for some reason. One argument for the original version is that the monsters themselves look a lot scarier, but considering you're going to have your back to them most of the time, that's what makes the better gameplay of the HD version superior for me. Quick personal note, I want to thank everyone who watched my Fallout video. The response has blown me away in the comments and DMs I've gotten. The support means a lot to me. I made this video way quicker than I made the Fallout 1 one, and I will be honest, I'm scared about it seeming rushed. But please tell me if it seems that way and I'll work on it for the next one. Peace.